We began our conversation with Senator Ted Cruz during the break. We'll play that at the end of this interview, so you won't miss any part of that. Senator Cruz asked the question of Inspector General Michael Horowitz as to whether or not President Obama might have been aware of what was going on either before this happened or was he apprised of it afterwards. Senator, what did you think of the answer to that?
Well, he didn't really answer that question, and that is one of the most serious follow-ups that need to occur, is who knew what and when did they know? And most of the Inspector General report focuses on what I would say are the low-level and mid-level people. It was folks at DOJ and FBI, some of whom were grossly negligent, others of whom were deliberately committing criminal conduct. What it's relatively light on is the higher-ups, the Deputy Attorney General, the Attorney General, the White House Counsel, the White House National Security Advisor, the Vice President, the President. Who was in the loop? I have to say, with this sort of investigation, it is hard to believe you got an FBI director, James Comey, who, look, I think James Comey thought he was J. Edgar Hoover. He was trying to amass power. He was irresponsibly and really cavalierly launching an investigation on the Republican presidential nominee during the presidential campaign. But the question of who was part of the decision-making tree and who knew about it, that has yet to be answered fairly or directly. I'm going to keep pressing to get answers to that because that is highly, highly relevant.
So if the House votes on the articles of impeachment and they pass them, which I think they're going to see some defections, but we'll worry about that later, this ends up on the floor of the Senate. Where do you expect this to go from here?
Well, I think you're right that next week we'll see the House vote and they'll vote out articles of impeachment. They'll lose several Democrats probably, but I think they'll hold enough of their party line to impeach the president. If that happens, it goes over immediately to the Senate. And the Senate, in all likelihood, will commence a trial starting in early January. I think the expectation is that Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer will agree on a scheduling order, scheduling the trial to start probably first week of January. The length of the trial is likely to be anywhere between 2 weeks and 6 weeks. The Bill Clinton impeachment trial was 6 weeks long. Mitch McConnell a week ago put out the schedule for the Senate for 2020. The schedule starts in February. In other words, he left the entire month of January blank for an impeachment trial. Once the trial starts, the Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, will preside, so he'll be in the center chair. Every senator, all 100 senators, will be in our desks. Under the Senate rules, all of the Senate business is suspended. It is likely to start with the House managers presenting their case. Now, I don't know who the House managers will be. They have to name them, but it's likely to be Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler and some of the players that we've seen on TV day and night for the past several weeks. The House managers will have the opportunity to stand in the well of the Senate and present their case, put on their evidence, make their legal arguments as to why they believe the president should be removed from office. The White House, the president's defense team, will have an opportunity to defend the president, and they'll put on their case. And one thing I've said a number of times is what the House did was really shameful. It was a one-sided partisan process. It ignored due process. They did not allow the White House to cross-examine the witnesses. They did not allow the minority to call any witnesses. It was a kangaroo court. They only wanted their own evidence, their own witnesses, and nobody else could participate. I am confident that the Senate will do much, much better, that the Senate is going to respect fairness, the Senate's going to respect due process, and in particular, if the president wants to call witnesses, if the president believes he should call Hunter Biden or he should call the whistleblower, I think the Senate should allow the president to call witnesses. Now, that may well be a fight in the Senate. There may not be 51 votes to do that, but I think there will. I think the Senate is going to respect due process and fairness. And after a fair trial where both sides can present their views, that I am extremely confident this matter is going to be thrown out. There aren't the votes there. The House has not proven their case. This is not impeachable conduct. These are not high crimes and misdemeanors. And so at the end of both sides presenting their case, the Senate will vote, and this matter will be thrown out.
Senator Ted Cruz is our guest. Do you expect Adam Schiff to be called before the Senate, put under oath, and to answer questions related to his conversations and the timeline of that with the whistleblower?
I don't know. It depends, number one, on whether the White House calls him. So the White House will make the initial determinations of what witnesses they want to call. And their legal team is debating those questions right now. And then it depends, number two, on what the Senate's willing to do. This is a weird trial in that every factual issue and every legal issue is decided by 51 people. As an initial matter, the Chief Justice can make a ruling, but any ruling the Chief Justice makes can be overturned by 51 senators. As a practical matter, I think what John Roberts is likely to do is what William Rehnquist, the former Chief Justice, did, my old boss, during the impeachment of Bill Clinton, which is what William Rehnquist did, is he simply referred the question straight to the Senate and had the Senate vote on it. And so on something like whether to call Adam Schiff, if the White House made the decision to call Adam Schiff, the Senate would have the opportunity to vote on it. I don't know if there'd be 51 votes or not for that. I think it is more likely that the Senate approves hearing testimony from Hunter Biden and the whistleblower. My guess is that there would be some senators reluctant to call a sitting member of Congress. I don't know that. I would happily call Adam Schiff. I would vote yes to do that. But I think between those three witnesses, Hunter Biden and the whistleblower are more likely to be called than Adam Schiff is.
Okay, hold on. Senator Ted Cruz, more with him coming up. We will take a quick break. I will continue our conversation with Senator Cruz during that time, and we'll hear those at the end of our conversation. So stay tuned.
The Michael Berry Show.
Cruz is our guest live where he is in D.C. In the news quite a bit yesterday. Senator, you made the statement that these guys who spied on Donald Trump were not Jason Bourne. They were Beavis and Butthead. But isn't that really the point? If they weren't such bumbling fools, would we have known this? Is this happening? Has this happened before? Is this the culture at the FBI and the Department of Justice? I mean, is this a widespread abuse of our system? Because this is disturbing.
It is very disturbing. I can tell you it didn't used to be. I served in the Department of Justice back in 2001 under President George W. Bush, and it most definitely was not the culture at that time. I think what we're seeing is the legacy of 8 years of Barack Obama's presidency, because they treated the Department of Justice and the FBI and the federal agencies as their own personal enforcers, as their partisan muscle. And it really corrupted the nonpartisan tradition at those agencies. I think it is really part of what you see. It's why I use the Beavis and Butthead analogy. They're just brazen. They're not hiding it. They're not being stealthy. These guys just didn't give a damn, and they're so cavalier. It's clear they never thought anyone would call them to account. Listen, they all believed Hillary Clinton was going to be elected. So if Hillary Clinton was elected, either they'd be back or it'd be their buddies and cronies, and nobody would care that they were abusing law enforcement, they were abusing national security, they were abusing wiretaps, they were spying on their Republican opponent. They viewed it as that. They had complete carte blanche to do that, and there would be no accountability. And I think there are a lot of people scared and surprised that there's actually accountability, and they got caught for what they were doing.
Senator Lindsey Graham said, quote, former FBI Director James Comey said this week that your report vindicates him. He's talking about Horowitz. Is that a fair assessment of your report? To which Horowitz responded, I think the activities we found here don't vindicate anybody who touched this. Why won't Comey renew his security clearance and come forward? Do you think that Comey will end up being prosecuted by the end of all this?
I don't know. I certainly hope he is held to account. I hope that people are prosecuted. I think James Comey behaved in a very political manner. I think he had a long pattern of being very political, being cavalier with abusing power. And I think right now he's in full-on spin mode. He is trying to defend what happened. He is someone who is not happy that someone shined a light on the conduct of the FBI, because that was supposed to be their personal playpen that nobody was supposed to ask questions. I will say, opposite of being vindicated, this report is an indictment that is damning. I've never seen something this bad come out of the Department of Justice and FBI, and that's why Comey is trying to spin so hard.
Ari Fleischer posted yesterday, CNN is not taking the Senate Horowitz hearing live. Unbelievable. A perfect example of how bias works. It's not just what they cover, it's what they don't cover. A lot of you in public life, yourself included, have lamented the fact that the left's coverage of this has skewed so far. And rather than just ignore that, you've called them to account, I think, with the intention of either discrediting them because they're so biased, or trying to get them out of just a sense of decency, if nothing else, to air this. How difficult is it for you to make your point to the American people if some of these media outlets refuse to cover it?
It is unbelievably difficult. That tweet you mentioned from Ari Fleischer yesterday, I retweeted that. It was a great observation. It's what you face every day. One of the consequences of the era of Trump is that I think Donald Trump has broken the media. Just a few years ago, you and I both remember, people used to defend the media. They used to say, oh, they're not really biased. Nobody does that anymore. Nobody makes the argument they're not biased, and there's a reason. You can't look at them and credibly maintain they're not biased. They are foaming at the mouth. They hate Donald Trump, and the media they're not pretending anymore. This past Sunday I was on Chuck Todd on Meet the Press. I've known Chuck a long time. I've done Meet the Press many, many times. I have never seen Chuck behave like he did last Sunday, whereas I was laying out the facts that underlay the potential of corruption in Ukraine, of Joe Biden and Hunter Biden being paid $83,000 a month, $1 million a year by the largest natural gas company in Ukraine. And by the way, Hunter Biden didn't know anything about natural gas, but he was there because his dad was vice president of the United States. There was enormous prima facie evidence of corruption, which the president and the Department of Justice are absolutely authorized and indeed responsible to investigate corruption. Well, look, Chuck Todd didn't want any of that evidence brought out, and he just about lost his mind. And the media as a whole is panicking. They're in an absolute state of panic right now because the House Democrats' case is falling apart, because impeachment has gone so badly that the media is in a full-fledged panic. And I think it's important to call the media to account for being as partisan as they are. You look at this Inspector General report. What most of the media reported, the headline was, Inspector General finds no political bias. Well, it's true that there are several statements in that report that says he did not find direct testimonial evidence that they made these decisions because of political bias. So that statement's there, but what those headlines ignore is the 434 pages outlining pattern after pattern of grotesque misconduct, including an FBI lawyer deliberately altering evidence and committing criminal conduct in order to justify wiretapping a presidential campaign. That's the big news, and yet somehow on the 6 o'clock news, they won't air it because they believe their job is to be Adam Schiff's and Jerry Nadler's press secretary rather than actually objectively cover what's happening in the country.
Senator, I don't know what your schedule looks like. I don't know if you can stay or if you have to go. I'll leave that to you at this point. We're up against a break.
I think at this point I probably need to run, but Michael, thank you for what you're doing each and every day, and I hope you and your beautiful family have a wonderful, blessed Christmas.
Thank you, buddy. Senator Ted Cruz. We will play for you in the next segment the two discussions we had during the commercial breaks. So that's probably all of next segment because it was two discussions of about 4 minutes or so, including whether or not Adam Schiff will be called to testify. So more of our conversation with Ted Cruz a few moments ago coming up. Stay tuned. Don't change that down. Stay right there. Here is part one of our conversation before the interview started during the break with Senator Cruz. Senator Ted Cruz is our guest.
Michael, great to be with you.
So you made some news last night. Your discussion with the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, you really narrowed in on the idea, to use your language, that an FBI official can alter and then submit fraudulent evidence to a secret court that will then be used, with the authorization of that court, as a justification to spy on a private citizen. And I'll add to that, a private citizen who is actually just a proxy because he's standing beside him for the candidate to be president of the United States of America. And the Inspector General says, yeah, it's about what happened.
Yeah, look, what's in the Inspector General report is nothing less than stunning. The report is 434 pages long. It is detailed. It is meticulous, and it lays out a pattern of abuse of power at the FBI and the Department of Justice that was stunning. It's unlike anything I've ever seen before. What you just referenced, one of the facts that the Inspector General discovered is that a lawyer at the FBI, an assistant general counsel, that they were seeking to justify a wiretap on Carter Page. Carter Page is this foreign policy advisor, is one of the people who was advising the Trump campaign. And one of the arguments they were making to the FISA court, the court that authorizes the wiretaps, is they said, well, look, Carter Page is talking to all these Russians, so that shows we need to put a wiretap on him. Now, one question that is obviously pretty relevant if he's talking to all these Russians is whether or not Carter Page was a source for the CIA. Well, the FBI emailed the CIA and asked, hey, was Carter Page a source for you? And the CIA emailed back and said, yes, he was a source. In other words, when he was talking to the Russians, he was doing it to help us, to help the CIA. He was talking to the Russians. Now, that's a very big difference from just some shady guy who's talking to Russians versus, wow, he's working for the CIA to do it.
He was doing so in an authorized fashion.
Yes. So the CIA sends this email saying, yes, he's a source. The FBI lawyer alters the email. He adds the words, he was not a source. So not only does he alter it, he literally reverses what the email says. Email says, yes, he was a source. The FBI lawyer reverses it and says, no, he was not a source. And then he sends that fraudulent altered email on to a lawyer who uses it to make a sworn declaration to the FISA court to justify the wiretap. That is, Michael, I'll tell you right now, if you or I did that in litigation, let's say we had a car crash. You got in a car crash driving home tonight, and in the course of the evidence, you altered an email and created fraudulent evidence, you'd go to jail. I'd go to jail. Anyone else, that would be obstruction of justice. That would be perjury. That would be material misstatement. That is blatant misconduct, and that's just one of the 17 examples the Inspector General found of the FBI and the Department of Justice deceiving the courts, lying, and doing it because they had, I believe, a partisan mission to try to go after Donald Trump. And I think that is dangerous in the extreme, and it's how all of this started.
Since the Inspector General report came out on Monday at about noon Central, Attorney General Barr, when asked the question by NBC and the Wall Street Journal CEO Roundtable, said consistently, hey, they said, well, will there be consequences paid by these individuals who did this? Comey, McCabe, Strzok, Page. And he seems to suggest that when the Durham investigation is completed, that we may see some consequences.
I very much hope so. When the Inspector General report came out, both Attorney General Barr and U.S. Attorney Durham put out statements that essentially said there's more to come. The statements were highly unusual, but they were encouraging. I hope so. Look, you can't read this IG report without thinking there are people that need to go to jail, that this conduct was criminal. It was egregious. I mean, look, I've worked in the Department of Justice. I cannot imagine seeing the conduct that went on. This is not what the Department of Justice has been for decades. Sadly, I think this is one of the greatest legacies of the Obama presidency. They politicized the Department of Justice, the FBI, the intelligence community. Remember, this is the same Obama administration that used the IRS to target citizens for their First Amendment speech, for disagreeing with President Obama politically.
Right. Senator Ted Cruz is our guest. Senator, a lot of confusion as to exactly how this thing plays out, but at the end, when the actual vote is cast in the trial by each of the 100 senators in the Senate, it requires a 2/3 majority. You were talking about a 51 majority on decisions of procedure, but it requires a 2/3 majority to convict, correct?
Correct, and that's an important decision. So procedural questions, what witness to call, what the timing is, any question of procedure is simple majority, it's just 51. But the final verdict, guilty or not guilty, requires a 2/3 majority. In other words, to remove the president from office takes 67 senators voting guilty. I think the chances of that are almost precisely zero. The House simply hadn't proven their case. They don't have their evidence, and frankly, the articles of impeachment that they're going to be voting on are an incredible admission of defeat for House Democrats. You know, just a few weeks ago, they were talking bribery because the Democratic Campaign Committee had focus group that they'd polled it, and they discovered, gosh, bribery is really bad. People don't like bribery. And so that became the talking point for every House Democrat. Then the problem was the witnesses came in, the evidence came in, and there wasn't evidence of bribery. They couldn't prove bribery. They wanted to accuse the president of it, but they didn't actually have evidence or facts to back it up. So then the past few weeks, the Democrats have retreated mightily. So this past weekend, they put out a 55-page report. They called it a scholarly report, in which they argued that to impeach a president, you don't have to prove any criminal conduct. You don't have to prove the president violated any criminal laws. You don't have to prove the president violated, they said, any laws whatsoever. You don't have to prove he has a speeding ticket. That they can simply impeach for what they call abuse of power, which really means political and policy differences. They are impeaching Donald Trump because they hate Donald Trump, because they disagree with him politically, and because they're mad at the American people for electing him. And I got to tell you, the abuse of power is House Democrats using impeachment. The Constitution specifies impeachment is for treason, bribery, or other high crimes or misdemeanors. And by the way, the word other there is very significant. What it means is that treason and bribery are themselves high crimes or misdemeanors. And a basic canon of legal interpretation is that when you have items in a series like that, the third category is interpreted as being similar in kind and nature to the first two. In other words, high crimes or misdemeanors are other serious crimes like treason and bribery. They're not what the Democrats are doing, impeaching over just policy decisions. This is a profound abuse of process, abuse of the Constitution by the House Democrats.
During this time, this has distracted you and the Senate from getting your work done, But during this time, you have managed to put a lot of judges on courts, and I know that's an issue of great importance to you.
It is enormously important. We've confirmed over 160 federal judges. We've confirmed 50 Court of Appeals judges. But I'll tell you, not only that, we are passing into law just this next week legislation I introduced to stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. This is a big, big deal for foreign policy and national security. Nord Stream 2 is a pipeline being built from Russia to Germany. It would put billions in the pocket of Putin and fund his military aggression. It would make Europe dependent on Russian Russian energy even more. My legislation, bipartisan legislation, sanctions that, stops it, and hopefully we will stop this pipeline in its tracks, which is a huge foreign policy victory for the United States, for oil and gas jobs here in Texas, and it's a huge blow against Putin.